Welcome to Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine presented by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Learn more about us online at tertiumquids.org. Great program lined up for you this week. We kick it off with a recap of something that came up during the State of the Union address. But not only there, it's been an issue that has dogged many of us, especially as we try to grapple with the cost of health care. And joining us from American Commitment is Phil Kerpen, the president there. Phil, welcome back to the program. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great, Joe. How are you?
Well, absolutely wonderful. I thought the president did a great job with the State of the Union address, hitting a lot of topics that I don't think a lot of people expected the president to be center square on when he was elected president. And I don't know if you share that feeling, but I know that the price of prescriptions has been something that's kind of challenged executives from Virginia on all the way up through the White House through then. What was your view of what the president brought up and what has been discussed so far regarding prescription drug prices across the United States and versus the rest of the world?
Well, I thought, that section of the speech was a little bit shorter and less detailed than it could have been. So there's still a lot that we don't know. I do think he was absolutely correct when he said that we've got a problem where the rest of the world is free riding off of the research and development that we're paying for through drug prices in the United States. The rest of the world has very low price-controlled, government-set prices, and they cover the marginal cost and a little bit of marginal profit, and that's why companies are willing to do it as long as they have the U.S. market to make back the billions of R&D and a return on capital on that. But that's an extraordinarily unfair situation because American consumers are paying far, far, far higher prices. We're really covering the freight for the $2.5 to $3 billion that it takes to develop a new drug, and the rest of the world is paying a little over marginal cost because they have government price controls. And so I think he absolutely was correct in identifying that problem. But he also said, I'm going to be sending legislation to Congress to solve this problem. And, that, I think, raises more questions than it gives answers because what would the legislation possibly look like that could somehow break foreign price control regimes? I hope that what he means by that is not I'm going to tell Congress to just adopt our own price controls and do the same thing that other countries do, because that doesn't really solve the problem. I mean, there wouldn't be a price differential anymore, but we also wouldn't have any incentive for R&D. We wouldn't get new cures. And so instead of them free riding off of us, there would be no moving vehicle on which anyone could ride. And so I'm very curious to see what that proposed legislation will actually be and how he thinks we can take on this problem of foreign price controls.
Well, talk a little bit about his team that would be working on this, because I know that when it's come to diplomatic affairs, especially trade deals and the way we react to the global market versus the internal market, a lot of folks get nervous when the president talks about tariffs, often using them, but sometimes, moreover, imposing them as ways to get people to the table to discuss the price controls overseas and that kind of thing. Does he have people in place that are talking with the pharmaceutical industry and with think tanks like yours discussing how to get a better free market in the rest of the world rather than just creating our own price controls?
Well, yes. I mean, they've taken a lot of input from a lot of people, and they're sort of doing both the right thing and the wrong thing right now within the Trump administration. I think they've been very aggressive on the trade front, and the U.S. trade rep has made this a major priority for what it's worth. They have a strong focus on the pharmaceutical sector and price controls and intellectual property protections in their annual report on foreign intellectual property violations, what's called the Special 301 report. And there is some significant progress, particularly with respect to biological drugs in the new USMCA, the NAFTA successor agreement. They were able to negotiate 10 years of data exclusivity for biological drugs. That data exclusivity means that for 10 years, a would-be generic cannot use the data that was filed of the innovator drug in their own applications, and so that sort of provides effective return, sort of protection on the original investment. And U.S. law is 12 years of data exclusivity, but Obama had agreed to just 5 years in the TPP deal that was scuttled, and so this is a pretty significant step here, if this becomes the new model in USMCA, 10 years of data exclusivity will certainly help in terms of being able to recover the costs for biotech drugs in particular from other countries. And so that's a very positive step in the USMCA, but it's relatively minor in the grand scheme of Canada still imposing price controls on essentially all drugs, and that has not been loosened. And so these trade negotiations are very, very difficult, and you can imagine why, Joe. You're sitting down across the table with another country. They don't want to agree to let their drug prices rise in their country. I mean, think about the politics of that from their side. And so they're trying very, very hard, but it's an extraordinarily difficult thing to do. At the same time, while I commend the Trump administration efforts on the trade front on this, I'm very concerned about a demonstration proposal that Secretary Azar at HHS has suggested for the Medicare Part B program, which are physician-administered drugs. They are actually proposing a demonstration project in which they would use an index of foreign prices to set the U.S. price in the Medicare program. Well, the foreign prices are all government-set price control prices far below market price. The current Medicare methodology uses the average sales price in the private sector in the United States. They would replace it with essentially a basket of foreign price controls. Well, I'm concerned about that for two reasons. One is it's the first camel's nose under the tent for price controls in the United States, which, as I mentioned, if those took hold, you could totally undermine the incentive for research and development and finding new cures. But number two, even just doing a demonstration project would make those already difficult trade negotiations almost impossible, because if you're sitting down across the table with another country trying to argue they should allow their drug prices to rise, they should loosen their price controls, and they can come back with, hey, you guys started using our prices and setting your own in the Medicare program, so our prices must be pretty good. That's almost a conversation ender, I think.
Yeah.
And so I think it's I love what they're doing on the trade. I'm very concerned about this demonstration project proposal, though, to bring foreign prices into Medicare.
It almost seems ironic that all these countries that tout their socialized medicine, well, it's easy to do if you're restricting what the cost is. You have a column.
Well, and if Americans are paying for all the R&D,
yeah, exactly,
you're scooping it up at government-set prices.
Yeah, it's great. All that socialized medicine in Canada is great. Now, at AmericanCommitment.org, you have a great piece, Don't Import Foreign Price Controls, Break Them. And you quote a study by the Committee to Unleash Prosperity that talks about some stunning numbers, not just about free markets, but about, the demagoguery. I think it blows up the demagoguery that Merck or AstraZeneca or these companies are just greedy oligarchs who are just gathering up their money and sitting on it like daddy warbucks. What you're showing in this report is stunning to the amount of increased pharmaceutical aid to our health can be unleashed if we broke the foreign controls, and also our life expectancy and I guess through that, obviously, the overall health of the human race.
Yeah, I mean that's why it's so crucial to get the incentives right for R&D. It's not just because there's economic benefit, although there is economic benefit. It's a major industry, but it directly relates to the health outcomes. The number of new treatments and cures that are developed depend on the market returns for those, incentivizing that research and development. And if we've got a situation like what we have right now, where the only place in the world really that you can get a market return on research and development is the United States, we're going to get a lot less new treatments and cures than we would if other countries had market returns. So remember, the average right now cost of bringing a new drug to market is between $2.5 and $3 billion. That's billion with a B. Well, why does it cost so much? Because there are many, many failures for every success, and you got to average those in. It's a highly speculative endeavor.
Mm-hmm. Lots of trial and error. Yeah.
And so what the study found, which I thought was just incredible, was if we convince the other rich countries to have market pricing instead of price control, so Europe, Japan, Canada, the other rich countries, we're not asking third world countries to pay, U.S. prices. They don't have any money, so that wouldn't work. But if the rich countries, the OECD countries, loosened their price controls, had market-based pricing, this study found we would get 8 to 13 additional new drugs discovered and brought to market per year. So over a decade, we're talking, 100 new drugs. And the estimate is that would raise life expectancy in the United States between 1 and 1.5 years. And it could be more because, of course, you don't know what those drugs might be. If you had a lot more research going on, somebody might cure Alzheimer's. Somebody might find a general cure for cancer. You don't know what it would be. And so we can sort of feed into these models, and they'll show sort of, the linear increase in life expectancy, that kind of thing. But there's also the potential for a discontinuity, for a big bang actual breakthrough cure in something. Those become more likely as well if there's more of a market return and therefore a larger volume of research and development going on. And so it's not just about the economics, although, if we did have higher prices abroad, more market-based prices abroad, prices would come down in the United States somewhat because you'd have a lot more drugs, you'd have a lot more competition and so forth, and you'd be able to get a return on capital globally instead of just in the United States. So we would get lower prices in the United States. But to me, the far more significant impact if we were able to break foreign price controls is we would get more cures, and we'd be healthier, and we'd live longer. Not just us, but the whole world would.
Wouldn't that also be a great point to make? You brought up the developing world, the emerging world, the poor countries, call it for what it is, whether it be Africa, subcontinental, that by breaking these price controls, it seems to me, and I'm not an economist, I'll ask Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez next time I talk to her. I had to insert some levity in
she
this.
She says everything should be free.
Yeah, that's right. But wouldn't breaking these price controls therefore create a better opportunity for lower costs, for creating the cures for some of these developing nations, because now more people are picking up the weight of the cost of the development of these drugs? Therefore, it would be easier for us to create the aid programs for developing world countries?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, we would have, if we have the incentives aligned to get more research and development and more cures globally, they'll be sold at very low cost or even donated to the poor countries, because that's what the manufacturers have been doing for a very long time. That's what the international organizations and the aid organizations have been doing. And so the answer is yes. The benefits would be global. And, that I think is one of the key crucial points that we need to make in the context of these trade negotiations is, look, you'll get a little bit of political pain in your country, definitely, if you allow prices to rise. We're not going to deny that. But in the long term, you'll be able to claim credit for, new cures being developed, new treatments, longer lives, healthier people worldwide. And so, I think that's really the way that we need to approach it, and try to kind of get these other countries to loosen their price controls. As I said about the president's speech, I'm very curious what kind of legislation he proposes. Will it actually be? Will it just be something like what's been proposed in Medicare, where we just adopt foreign price controls domestically? That I would be very much against.
Oh, yeah.
Or will it be some kind of enhanced tools to try to help our trade negotiators somehow? I'm curious to see what the proposal actually is.
How does the president win over support in the Democratic Party for this? While ever since I forget the fellow's name with the EpiPen controversy, the demagoguery over the profiteers, the drug profiteers, has been so rancorous amongst the American left that these are people that are profiting over our illnesses, and it's immoral. And if there's a place where they've been able to make some hay in these cases, how does the president, what would you advise, I guess, Phil, the president to do to win over at least the moderate wing of the Democratic Party to support such proposals and to push this agenda of opening up these foreign markets rather than closing our own?
Well, I think he's got to do a couple things. First of all, there's another proposal from the Trump administration that's going to very directly result in lower prices at the pharmacy counter for seniors, and they've got a proposal that would require pharmacy benefit managers and insurance plans to pass through the rebates that they're getting from manufacturers, pass them through at the register. Right now, those mostly go into their profits, and so that is they have an exemption from the anti-kickback statute. He wants to take that away. That's going to be very visible, I think, to end consumers, and there's going to be a lot of political upside for that. That does not affect the economics of developing new cures and so forth, because the manufacturers are still getting the same net prices that they get now, but there's going to be a lot less that's siphoned off to the profits of the middlemen, and the discounts are going to reach through to the end consumer. So that's probably going to be his biggest focus, I think, in terms of a political message, and something that will almost certainly be bipartisan. At the same time, we've got these bigger questions that we've been talking about, and that's going to be a big challenge because you've got a lot of Democrats who probably love this proposal of just directly linking U.S. prices to foreign prices. That's something Bernie Sanders, for instance, has been talking about for a long time. And if the administration decides that they're going to go bipartisan by, elevating and spotlighting that side of things, then a lot of conservatives like me are going to have to be their opponents, which is, not my preference. I would rather be cheerleading them than opposing them. I'd prefer they were doing things I support. If they spotlight the trade side and what they've been able to accomplish in USMCA, and they keep pushing in other agreements, and if this proposed legislation has more to do with enhancing somehow trade negotiating tools than it does with importing foreign price controls, so they'll get a lot of support from conservatives, but frankly, Democrats are probably not going to be in favor of that. So to answer your question, I fear that the way he's going to get Democratic support is by supporting Democratic policies, like linking U.S. prices to foreign prices through a price control regime. I hope that he won't do that, and I think that the best sort of arrow in his quiver for getting broad public support and probably bipartisan support is this proposal to require rebates to be passed through to end customers, which of course the insurance companies and the big pharmacy managers, they're against that because that's going to come right out of their bottom line. But I think they're going to be challenged to sell their position to the public.
Well, and certainly he's very good at taking his message directly to the public via his Twitter feeds. Phil Kerpen from the folks at American Commitment, their president, is on with us. One of the things that I'm adding from the State of the Union address that wasn't vis-a-vis related to the prescription drug issue that gives me hope that he wouldn't import price controls was his section on Venezuela. Does the president grasp that a lot of Venezuela's economic problems began with price controls? Because when they mandated higher wages, businesses started to close, and then Chavez instituted price controls just before he died, and then Maduro continued them, just almost immediately creating the economic problems that still dog Venezuela to this day?
I hope so.
He brought it up.
I think the experience of price controls everywhere they've been tried has been pretty universal in that they cause shortages and distortions, and people get angry, and then they tend to collapse. The tricky thing, though, let me actually pull this quote from you. Milton Friedman wrote this letter, 15 years ago, something like that now, when people were talking about importing Canadian price control prices into the U.S. market. And I think he got, 100 or so economists to sign it. And here, let me give you the quote from them, which I think is so compelling. Milton Friedman and about 100 other economists, this was their letter. It was, quote, "Drug price controls are more difficult to remove than other price controls. Controls on oil and other products often tend to be limited or short-lived as voters eventually object to the resulting shortages and distortions. The effects of drug price controls, however, are far more difficult to observe because they mainly affect medicines that haven't been invented yet."
Wow.
And that's the real danger, that they put price controls on, and people say, "Oh, this is great, I'm paying less, there's no problem." And what they don't know is that it caused a collapse in R&D, and something that otherwise would have been cured hasn't been. And that's that's why drug price controls are even more frightening and dangerous than other types of price controls, because people don't necessarily see the shortages that are caused, and so they don't clamor for change.
What do you say to somebody, Phil, and I can hear them already saying, yes, but medicine is different. You can't compare telephones to medicines because, deregulating the phone industry that eventually winds up with all of us having a supercomputer in our pocket is not the same, because we're talking about healthcare. How do you, and I think you may have during the course of this interview already laid out the groundwork and put out the landmines to blow it up, but that is going to be the common argument, is that medicine, Phil, is different. Should it be viewed as different or not?
Well, I think when something is of the utmost importance and it's about life and death, it's even more important that it be handled in the private sector, subject to market forces, than be entrusted to government bureaucrats and politicians. I know that people who are not of my ideological bent don't necessarily see it that way, but the point that I would make to them is, you look at the global budgets of the pharmaceutical companies, and it's something around $150 to $200 billion per year that they're putting into research and development. If you decided, hey, we're adopting a new economic system, a new pricing system where there's no longer an incentive for private R&D, to replace that over a decade, you would need $2 trillion or more. How are you going to come up with that? How would you do it? Some massive tax hike? Okay, well, now how are you going to deploy that $2 trillion? Mm. How are you going to decide what research takes place and what doesn't, and what gets commercialized and what doesn't? How are you going to make all those decisions without market forces? How are you going to do that in a centrally planned way as government? You could do some. You could do some massive expansion of the NIH budget or what have you, and they'd be able to do some things. But I'll tell you, as a practical matter, it's almost impossible to envision the scope and scale and the effectiveness of the R&D that we have right now in these companies being replicated by anything else.
Well, I will quote another famous economist from a less renowned side, Paul Krugman, when he was asked about advisability of care panels. I think his answer is telling when it comes to this, because he immediately runs to, of course we wouldn't permit extremely expensive treatments to be done, that wouldn't be cost effective. And I think you would see the same sort of thing impact a socialized pharmaceutical development industry, that you wouldn't go after expensive cures. You would look for less expensive hospice care as the end result of that, Phil. And that's what again, and then that doesn't benefit anyone in the world, because now Europe and the rest of the world is not getting the kind of life-saving treatment they could. So
definitely.
Well, at the end, do you know who has the president's ear on this? Should we be calling Tim Kaine and Mark Warner? Should we be calling Denver Riggleman and Abigail Spanberger or Morgan Griffith? Who should the listener be actioning right now to make sure that the president is hearing the right things on this?
Well, I think if somebody's feeling really engaged and concerned and about this right now, then by all means, call those people and tell them, the president should focus on breaking price controls, not adopting them in the United States. But you might want to wait until we see what the heck this actual proposed legislation is that he referenced in the State of the Union, because it's a big question mark right now, and I don't know if it'll be something we like or something we don't. So we might want to see what it is and then decide if we support or oppose it.
And we don't really have a timeline on that, do we?
Nope. He said, I'm going to be sending it. I don't know.
All right. Well, we'll keep an eye open. I'm sure we'll have you back as that gets closer. Phil Kerpen is the president of American Commitment. And again, thank you very much for what you do, AmericanCommitment.org. And we'll share the article you penned on the price controls as well. I do appreciate it, and you have a wonderful weekend, sir.
All right. Have a good one.
Up next, Tim Huelskamp, as we get into the Green New Deal. And he's certainly seen it from the inside of the halls of government, as well as the Heartland Institute. Next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Very excited, always great to have from the Heartland Institute, former member of the U.S. House of Representatives, but one of the great minds when it comes to the free market and in general what the American dream should look like. Tim Huelskamp is back on with us. Tim, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, sir?
I am doing great. Doing fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for that. Even in the events of the Green New Deal, you're still doing great?
I am fine. I always am excited when folks are exposed for what they really believe. And Green New Deal is pure socialism, and it's a great opportunity to discuss our founding principles and what they are and what they are not.
He has a great piece about this, and we'll post it up on our social media at the heartland.org website, How to Defeat the Democrats' Dangerous Green New Deal. But I guess the first, and I'm always worried about this when conservatives make light of things like this, because, yes, some of it was laughable, some of it seemed disoriented, some of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's presentations on it seemed to be not completely connected with one another. But those are the ones I usually worry about. Those are sort of the conversations that led us to Obamacare and other dangerous job-killing, freedom-killing, human-killing ideas that have come out in the past. So take us past the easy yucks about the Green New Deal and talk about some of the real dangerous normalization that can start with discussions about banning air travel and things like that, Tim.
Well, certainly it's dangerous in that we have come this far. If you look at the polling, young folks across America today, Joe, have a kinder view of socialism than they do free markets and capitalism. And that's been a shift in 8 years. And you go back 3 years ago, an avowed socialist who honeymooned in the Soviet Union, that would be Bernie Sanders, almost won. Some would say he did win, and then was lost it through theft, the nomination for the Democrat Party of America. And here we have where the Democrat Socialist of America agenda is what the Democrat Party has taken up. So, I mean, it is we could yuck it up, but it is serious that this proposal is actually being seriously considered, but it is socialism. At the same time, we've got Venezuela as a great example of what happens when the government runs everything and dictators and elites take over as they always do. And so it's dangerous that the proposal has this type of support among every leading candidate for one major party in America. But if you look down to it, that's why I welcome this debate. I mean, healthcare, I think we have shown to a lot of folks that government control doesn't work. And do we want to extend that to our entire energy system? Well, most people say, well, no, I'm not willing to pay for socialism, energy socialism. They don't like healthcare socialism. Do they like all the government schools being run by elected folks rather than parents and children? And most folks say, yeah, we can do better. But if you look at it, at the heart of it, it takes everything that was being proposed and implemented in Venezuela today, what you see in Castro's Cuba, what you saw in the Soviet Union, puts that all together in one place so we can look at it and say, hey, this is what they believe, and they believe counter to exactly what we believe, which is freedom and free markets, and they believe in elite control and government power. And if 2020 is about socialism versus free enterprise, I think we'll win that. But it'll probably be a close race, though.
Well, is this, and Tim, you and I have talked so many times. I think the first time you came on my program, you were in the House still, and part of the leading causes for open markets and free markets. And I think we talked even then about the dangers of crony capitalism, and if conservatives didn't realize the danger of increasing poverty, that they didn't do something to address it and just treat it as if it was just something the Democrats were going to demagogue. This is where I think Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders and these folks are picking up their groundswell, our communities that have grown poorer and poorer over the last 10 or 15 years. And for whatever the reasons are, they're going in and saying, listen, there's a bunch of money somewhere. We'll go get it, and we'll send it back here to you guys, as if that's the business model now, is go find the greedy, rich oligarchs, the American oligarchs. I've heard that phrase too many times in the last few months. But this is a reminder to conservatives that Adam Smith free market, open markets is the way to create the prosperity that doesn't allow this kind of socialism to take root.
Well, and you certainly, you want to talk about oligarchs. Look who is funding the Democrat Party. You look at Tom Steyer, a multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
I mean, they want energy poverty. They want Americans, the poorest people in America, to double, maybe even triple their utility bill. And yeah, there are literally millions of folks that can't pay their bills right now because of big government and energy socialism. And so, yeah, that's part of the message conservatives forget, and free market folks continue to forget, Joe. I mean, there's a moral case to be made here,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't ignore that. And if you have the left pointing out, well, not everybody's prosperous exactly, but the route to prosperity and human growth and moving forward is free markets and free enterprise and liberty and freedom. And on the other side, do you think a former bartender is going to figure that all out? And but we got a great opportunity now, like I said, to look at Venezuela. You want healthcare? Healthcare is free in Venezuela. That's why people are literally dying to leave the country. Food is free. That's why you had people literally starving to death. And eating their pets and animals in zoos, and people don't get that. And that's the miseducation that's taken place in our so-called higher education institutions. I mean, if you look at, I just saw a note today. If you look at Stanford University, supposedly one of the greatest universities on the whole West Coast, and you can't find a single course on free market economics, but you can find 90 courses on Marxism and big government economics and all these failed economic systems, but you can't find on one that actually works. And so everybody going through Stanford, these young folks are learning the falsities of the Marxists, and that's how they win, is propaganda and lies. So how we win is through truth and pointing out the reality, and Heartland does that every day, and we'll continue to do that, fighting this rise of socialism across America.
Tim Huelskamp is on with us from the Heartland Institute. Heartland.org is where you find them. Did you take heart in the length that the president went to bring up the failed state in Venezuela during the State of the Union address, that in the Oval Office we have somebody that gets that, or at least, if there are still skeptics that don't believe Donald Trump actually gets it, but that somebody who's advising him, whether it be Steve Moore or yourself or somebody, is at least advising him that this is what socialism, and this is why you have to fight it?
Well, that one is willing to say that. Definitely Ronald Reagan was willing to say that. But far too often since then, we had folks that shrank from the great American ideals. Where you had Obama actually apologizing that we're prosperous. And so we've got the flip side. You got one. You had Obama apologizing for prosperity and apologizing for freedom, and then going around the world and telling dictators it's okay, you can do what you want, and it's a topsy-turvy world. But when you have a president stands up and say we will not be a socialist country, but a warning there, Joe. I was just reading a conservative commentator today, always saying, you know what, Donald Trump's wrong just because we're never going to win this. Free things always beat freedom, and I disagree. I think Americans in particular have a yearning for our principles of our founding of free markets and freedom and liberty, and at the end of the day, they fully expect government's going to fail. And they see it every day. I mean, all they have to do is look at post office, look at Amtrak, and say, really? They can't even deliver the mail on time and get a train to show up on time.
Yeah,
how are they going to deliver our health care and pick our energy choices? And how are they going to dictate that cows can't fart anymore? And how they can, you go on and on. But again, it's a great debate for what our young folks across America need to see. They didn't see the Berlin Wall fall down. You and I did. They didn't see and read about what was happening in the Soviet Union. They didn't see what was happening in Cuba, and they never got under their desk and had to worry about the Marxists
firing missiles,
sending weapons our way. And but it's time to reteach them that history. It's time to take folks that are escaped from Venezuela and Castro and China and North Korea. I mean, a perfect example, North versus South Korea. Well, which one do you want? You want socialism? Head north. If you want a taste of freedom, head south. And there couldn't be a more clear difference, even if the mainstream media refuses to report that. We're going to do that. You're doing that, and the president himself is doing that as well.
It's frightening times when the dictator of North Korea wants more free markets than graduates of Stanford University, isn't it, Tim?
Well, yeah, and there is an effort underway that says, hey, you know what, we need an exchange program in Venezuela, but you go down there, you can't come back.
Yeah.
You want to live socialism, head down there, but by the way, just a warning, there's no iPhone going to be working down there.
Well,
and that's what we need to instill in these folks, that, hey, here's the reality, and the left refuses to accept reality and engage in propaganda instead.
look at the struggles, and I go back not just to the famous quote from Margaret Thatcher, eventually you run out of other people's money, and I'd like your thoughts, having looked at the Green New Deal, as to how quickly that moment, that Malcolm Gladwell moment, will come when we run out of other people's money. Because I was looking at it and saying this is almost like a diabetic's look at how quickly I can burn through somebody else's money. But beyond that, she administered her government in Great Britain through a period of privatization, but it was painful and it was a struggle and it was a fight because people were scared and they were being scared by those who were going to lose power over them, and they were going to lose their cushy government jobs over it and would have to compete in the marketplace. And she's written at length about how difficult it was to re-privatize that had been socialized. Both of those things are important, but first I'd like your thought as to how quickly we would run out of other people's money if we were just to adopt the Green New Deal, Tim.
Well, I doubt we would run out in people's mind very quickly. I mean, our massive, trillions of dollars of debt already, and as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez herself said in the initial proposals, we'll just print money. And again, that's the disastrous thing about socialism is it's always other people's money, and the elites always do well. You think the dictator of Venezuela is starving to death? Absolutely not. It's quote the little people that he uses and misuses and abuses, and the members of Congress will never feel the effects of socialism. Trust me, I've been there. Most of them are rich and wealthy, and they get taken care of. It's the rest of us that lose out.
And that printing of money, Tim, frightens me even more because every dollar they print dilutes the value of the next one that comes off the printing press until, sure, I've got $10,000 in my pocket, but I'm going to use that to buy my groceries. And
$1 million% in inflation in Venezuela. That's the economic reality. And that's not the first or last time. I mean, it's a tough lesson. But what's amazing is, in my mind, you have the Democrat Party that said they're the party of the poor, but their policies are going to hurt the poor the most of all. It won't be the Tom Steyers of the world. It won't be George Soros. It won't be Bernie Sanders, who's doing very well, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
It's the rest of people, and they set up this elite. Everywhere socialism has been tried, there's always some elite fills their pockets. It's always corrupt. And under a free enterprise system, a free market system, an open, transparent system, if you take too much, you lose out. If you can't produce anything, whether you're in Great Britain or Venezuela or America, you got to find something else to do. But frankly, there's a lot of folks that are cronyist. They like the current system, but innovation is going to take place at even greater speed. So that's probably the biggest hope. If you roll back to the early 1980s to now, all the big innovation is going to take place, and government gets further and further behind, and folks can look at their iPhone and say, well, man, here's the post office, here's my iPhone. And you need to get the young folks and say, hey, which do you want? Do you want that? What's the post office? They don't even know these days. And so I think education continuing, I think we got a great opportunity with social media to demonstrate beyond any doubt which system works better.
Tim, let me ask you this then, as we talk about the Green New Deal, but in general, we talk about the regulatory state. We watch as Chris Horner wrote extensively, of course, the author of Red Hot Lies and Power Grab and the Politically Incorrect Guide to Global Warming, has exposed that Michael Bloomberg and Tom Steyer are funding lawyers through nonprofits based at NYU and other places, inserting them in attorneys general offices to ostensibly weaponize our legal system against anyone that would deny these climate change claims, which have been debunked very easily. And maybe that's the problem, is it was too easy to debunk them, so we're just going to criminalize debunking them now. That's a chilling other side to this that also is reminiscent of the old Stalinist regimes of Russia, where if you didn't agree with the government, all of a sudden grandma disappears and is never heard from again.
Well, if you're a scientific researcher and find evidence and want to speak about the fact that Al Gore was wrong on everything, you probably won't get a job at a major university today, and I get that. But it does, when you look at the Green New Deal, it does bring home, though, the fact that green's the first part of it. And it's about environmental socialism, because if you can grab that, that's why the left has been crazy going after the climate change, the global warming, the whole agenda, which, again, is non-scientific, is fully based on somebody getting money out of somebody else's pocket to line their own, is based on bad science and bad politics at the UN and what have you. But for a lot of conservative and libertarian groups, the climate change, why is that important? Is that a sign? No, it's critically important. It is the camel's nose under the tent, if not the entire camel running over the tent. It says, hey, if you accept the green quote-unquote agenda, the fact that Americans are going to destroy the world in 2005, I guess it was, and then 2008, 2012, 2022, and I guess Alexandria thinks it's gone in 2030. I mean, it's fake. Every major prediction has been wrong, but you got to understand then that we have to tackle this head on, and that's why the first part of the Green New Deal says the UN is absolutely right. So, and Heartland's been working for 30 years on this, saying, nope. Here's the science. We have a 780-page book at print right now that says, you know what? If you want human progress, if you really care about the poor, you've got to have energy. Energy, fossil fuels is key to human prosperity. If we want to pull 1.3 billion people around the world out of poverty, they need access to fossil fuels. And if Alexandria says no, or Bernie Sanders says no, or Tom Steyer or Barack Obama says no, they're sentencing 1.3 billion people to energy poverty for the rest of their lives. And so we're on the side of angels. And I relish this debate about the Green New Deal, and I'm actually very thankful as far as the ideas. They bring this stuff forward, but we have to tackle it head on, like you said, and say, what's this about? It's not just about a Green New Deal and a legislation in Washington. It's about a whole idea of controlling people through controlling their energy sources. And it's a debate that we relish here at the Heartland Institute.
Well, and you were one of the most courageous congressmen I remember, because you challenged sacred cows, and I don't mean that as an adjunct to AOC's, the flatulent bovines, but you challenged the Farm Bill. You challenged the idea that these were necessary things. Talk about what a Republican or even just an independent conservative needs to do to go into the poor Black and Latino communities to talk about this prosperity that they've been denied. I see it as a two-pronged, because both the Green New Deal and the horrible debates we're having on abortion are both population control issues. They both seem to be driven by these elites, as you mentioned, Tim, that are flogging away at a very hand-in-glove way of population control, but they create this poverty in these communities. But Republicans never go in there. Their consultants say, oh, no, you'll never win in there, so don't go there. Go talk to your base. To encourage a Republican to go into districts that they wouldn't go in, what do you say to them?
Well, first, there's more than a few Republicans in my mind that totally agree with the leftist agenda here. I mean, many of the population controllers, some of our presidents, by the name of Bush, were actually in this whole category where they believed in population control. The first Bush, that's what he did in Congress, was pushing funding for Planned Parenthood back in the 60s. And so there is a rotten history. But there's an even more rotten history in the Democrat Party with Margaret Sanger and Planned Parenthood and the extermination of things they talk about. Even here, Supreme Court justices still talking about this. I mean, this language of bitter hatred of and not liking others, and so Republicans and Democrats are guilty of that. So, but I saw that when I was in Washington D.C., and so we got to get past that. But we got to be able to take the message out there of how freedom works, and we ought to be able to talk. But again, if you don't go and talk to people, if you don't go and challenge them on social media, or challenge them in person, or show them, the fact that there should be other choices, and here's how it works, and that and this is one other related issue, and we have talked about it. But if you want to educate folks in other communities, you got to give them better schools. Give them school choice. That's why it's key to this as well. If you're locked up in a bad school all your life and you learn all this junk from the NEA, how are you going to know any different? And you just become appendage of the Democrat Party. I mean, you don't see that. So, but I see young Republicans in particular are using social media, and the Heartland's trying to do the same to reach out to young folks who have been propagandized and miseducated. But you know what? The teacher can say one thing in the classroom. All they have to do is pick up their iPhone. They all seem to have iPhones. Like, wait a minute. Castro's not doing so well. He's gone. Well, Venezuela, what happened down there?
Yeah.
What happened in the Soviet Union? What's happening today in China and North Korea? But like we mentioned that, so suddenly what is you could control that classroom and that limiting that access. Anybody today in America can get on the internet and see, hey, wait a minute, there is other choices. There is another choice, and that's the choice of freedom. So, no, it's Republicans just got to get out of their shell and recognize that the other side's going after them. We should do the same. We should be proud to be for freedom and free markets, and unfortunately, not all Republicans. If you look today on the energy issue, last week in Washington, you had Republicans who were standing up and saying in the Energy Commerce Committee, we agree with the UN, we agree with Bernie Sanders, we agree with Tom Steyer, the world's going to collapse unless we have a carbon tax.
Well, because they see it as an economic thing rather than a social issue, and it's chilling, and we need to do something about that too, Tim. Never mind opening up the other can of worms you just opened about a free and open internet that we need to keep the government's grubby mitts off of so that we can have this information. I listen to folks wanting to fund government-provided high-speed internet, and I'm like, no, because then they'll tell you what you can see and not see on it, don't you? But Tim, we must go. I hope I see you at CPAC this year, coming up in just a few weeks up at National Harbor. We plan on being there. Oh, good.
Heartland will have a big presence there, and participate in a number of panels on climate change and hopefully the Green New Deal, and a great, exciting project we have to speed up and transform the drug approval process in America, to bring innovation to the FDA, and I think we'll have a great time talking about freedom and opportunity.
Well, you just circled around to our first guest, Phil Kerpen. To both of you, thank you so much for joining us this week, and then we'll see you at National Harbor in just a little while. Have a great day, Tim.
Thank you. Okay.
Heartland.org is where you find them. Till next week, for all of us here, so long, and thanks for all the fish.